Handsome, charming, wealthy beyond anything one could possibly imagine, and married to one of the great beauties of Imperial Russia. There was nothing in Prince Felix Yusupov's life that could have hinted at what he would eventually become, the man who killed Rasputin and lit the fuse on the powder keg that saw 3 centuries of Romanov rule end in a dismal basement. In many ways, Felix was the embodiment of the Russian aristocracy at the beginning of the 20th century, plagued by a nervous, corrosive aimlessness, bored by the world at his feet, his vices nurtured by the seemingly unending wealth into which he was born. A glittering, bejeweled exterior hiding a dark inner world of decay. To his billionaire family and to many other counts, barons, princes and dukes, the future must have stretched out endlessly in front of them. The thought of anything changing for anything but the better after centuries of prosperity must have never entered their mind, a mathematical impossibility. But they were about to find out what their French counterparts discovered in 1789, that things can change. They can always change. It will shock you how easily they can change. It certainly shocked them. According to the Yusupov archival records, the family was descended from a 6th century man called Abubekir ben Rayok, who claimed to be a descendant of Prophet Muhammad. Over the centuries, his illustrious bloodline migrated from Arabia to the shores of the Azov and the Caspian Sea and became part of the Golden Horde and eventually allied itself with the Romanovs. Military men, visionaries, diplomats, famed beauties, collectors with impeccable taste. The family produced many extraordinary personalities, and many of its members were familiar with the crowned heads of Europe, from Catherine the Great to Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. And they nurtured and received famous artists and writers, such as the great Alexander Pushkin. The Yusupovs were inveterate lovers of art and beauty. They built incredible palaces, theaters and gardens, amassed impressive collections of art and jewelry, established ceramic factories whose sole purpose was creating porcelain and glassware for the family's private use. As time passed, their wealth had grown to levels difficult to imagine. I find it genuinely challenging to illustrate the extent of their wealth to you, gentle listener. Even if, possessed by a sudden madness, the Yusupovs would have one day decided that they were going to give their money away or spend it foolishly every single day, they would have failed to reach rock bottom because they simply had too much money for one family to conceivably finish spending. They had over 100,000 acres of land, factories, mines, distilleries, oil fields on the Caspian Sea. The list of their palaces beggars belief. 4 in St. Petersburg, 3 in Moscow, and a whole 37 estates across Russia. They had so much that it was difficult for them to keep track of their many properties and possessions. A magnificent Sèvres dinner service offered to Prince Nicholas Yusupov by Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette was left to gather dust in a warehouse for over a century, until 1912, when 2 professors who were interested in this kind of porcelain visited the family and asked about it, leading them to rummage through their papers and locate the priceless service. On their Kériolet estate, they had a swimming pool whose temperature was always kept at a medium so the family could bathe in all seasons. And that in the 1800s. One year, the father of our protagonist gifted his wife a mountain for her birthday. That's right, a whole mountain. The Yusupovs collected treasures and oddities the way our grandparents collected stamps. Felix himself recalls that, as a young boy, he was scared to go into the library of his family's estate at Arkhangelskoye, which boasted over 35,000 volumes, because there was an unsettling, life-size automaton of Jean-Jacques Rousseau in 18th century costume there. They also had a collection of antique carriages. The list could go on for hours. When they travelled by train, The Yusupovs rarely bothered with first class. They had their own luxuriously furnished train wagons for themselves, their friends and their servants, which they would attach to whatever train was going in a direction they wanted. They employed 150 servants only at their Moika palace. The number of people in their employ must have been well above 1,000, taking into account all the factories they owned. It was in this unimaginable luxury that Prince Felix Yusupov was born on the 23rd of March, 1887. Monday's child is fair of face, says the nursery rhyme, but upon entering the world, Felix was premature and allegedly so ugly that his older brother Nicholas, upon laying eyes on his tiny, shriveled form, cried out, "Disgusting! Throw him out the window!" Fortunately, 5-year-old Nicholas was ignored, and Felix defied medical expectations by living. Having survived his brother's defenestration suggestion, the next unexpected obstacle in little Felix's life was the Orthodox priest who nearly drowned him while baptizing him. According to Orthodox custom, the baby must be completely submerged in the baptismal font 3 times. Experienced priests know how to cover the baby's nostrils and mouth so that the water doesn't come in. Felix had bad luck and was quite close to being sent back to his maker. Possibly because Felix had been so tiny, his mother was convinced that, after 3 boys, she would finally have a girl. In defiance of her dashed hopes, she resolved to dress Felix in girl's clothes until he was 5 years old, which he would later identify as the start of his vanity and love of fashion. He was a very sickly and thin boy and admitted in his memoirs to have had a difficult character. He was lazy, uninterested in learning, and prone to bouts of temper and pranks, such as getting visitors he did not like stuck in the palace's elevator. Felix went through an entire army of tutor, governesses and teachers, which he tormented until they left. He had no talent for music, dancing, tennis or ball games. He once accidentally launched a ball directly into Grand Duchess Alexandra Yosifovna's face. Instead, he was a good rider, had a beautiful singing voice and a flair for the theatrical. He liked animals more than people and had a dog, Gugus, and at one point even a squirrel, Tipti. In fact, he liked animals that much that he gave up hunting after one fateful day when he injured a hare and was haunted by the poor creature's agony. His character development was not helped by his mother's constant spoiling. Princess Zinaida Nikolaevna Yusupova was undoubtedly Felix's favorite parent. Her famous beauty was enhanced by her generosity. She was one of the leading philanthropists of the Russian Empire. She also had the advantage of a superb education, which she unfortunately failed to impart on her beloved son. Of her, Felix writes, "My mother was lovely. She was slim and had wonderful poise. She had very black hair, a soft olive complexion, and deep blue eyes as bright as stars. She was clever, cultured, and artistic. And above all, she had an exquisitely kind heart. No one could resist her charm, and far from being vain and proud of her exceptional gifts, she was modesty and simplicity itself. The more you have, she used to tell us, the more you owe to others. Be modest, and if you do happen to have any advantages, don't let those who are less favored know it." In a display of stubborn willpower, Zinaida had married below her station, much to the disappointment of her family. She and her younger sister Tatiana were the only heiresses of the vast Yusupov fortune, which made them both extremely sought after, but tragedy struck when Tatiana died at the age of 22, officially of typhoid fever, although rumors persisted that she had put an end to her life when the man she was madly in love with became engaged to another woman. The man who was dashing enough to capture Princess Zinaida's heart was Count Felix Felixovich Sumarakov-Elston. In order to save the Yusupov family name from extinction, Tsar Alexander III gave his permission for Felix's father to add his wife's name to his. This meant that Felix and his brothers had the title of Prince Yusupov and that of Count Sumarakov-Elston. This is how Felix describes his father. Physically, he was tall, good-looking and slim with dark eyes and black hair. Although he grew heavier with age, he never lost his fine bearing. He had more common sense than real intelligence, and his inferiors and subordinates loved him for his kindness. but he showed little tact in dealing with his superiors, and his frankness sometimes got him into trouble. He was a born soldier, and intellectual and artistic pursuits interested him little. He was not a particularly warm father either, and knew little of his sons' lives. Given free reins by his wife in terms of finances and completely unused to managing such a large fortune, he was prone to making disastrous investments and losing money. But the family wealth had become a great self-fueling machine lumbering forward, feeding its creators while at the same time requiring almost no upkeep from them. Even if a Yusupov would have proven to be weak and foolish, the machine could withstand his or her stupid decisions and tide the family over for 1, 2, 10 generations until a more brilliant Yusupov would inevitably appear and give the machine an oil change. This family of 4 had as chief residence the incredible Moika Palace. Looking at the pictures of this imposing residence, it's hard to believe that this was all just for a family of 4. Felix had warm memories of his home. There were flowers everywhere. The ashtrays were made out of amethyst. Uncut gems lay in pretty balls around the salon like potpourri, and the children would occasionally amuse themselves by playing with them. Felix and his brother, perpetually late at dinner time, were always running through the massive building, trying to find out in which of the palace's many dining rooms their parents were eating that day. Such a lifestyle, unimaginable to most of us, more than a century later, was the reality of the Russian aristocracy. The brilliant Princess Sophie Dolgoruki, born 1907, recalled how sheets and pillowcases would change daily. All were of very fine, cool linen, with the personal initial and crown, to indicate the title, embroidered on every item. Underclothes naturally would never be worn twice, and towels were changed immediately after use. The tablecloths covering the long tables and the napkins intricately folded at each place would have the family coat of arms actually woven into the center. Obviously, each big house had its own laundry on the premises, together with a plethora of servants who, with their families, lived, feudal fashion, in 2 sides of the house round the courtyard, above the stables and garages. Thinking back to Dolgoruki household, it seemed incredible that such a number of people were needed to care for the physical comfort of one family. In the large marble-floored front hall sat the Svezar, whose only duty was to open the door and lay down the strip of red carpet to car or carriage, so that the shoes of those arriving or departing should not be sullied by contact with the pavement. To keep him company in the hall were the couple of liveried footmen on duty that day, or, when my uncle was in residence, a couple of Cossacks in full uniform. They were part of a class for whom servants did everything. In one comically dark moment in the immediate aftermath of Rasputin's murder, one of the conspirators, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, took the dead man's boots and gave them to a servant to burn. The thought of burning them himself in secrecy instead of implicating a witness who might testify against him didn't seem to cross his mind. That kind of manual labor simply was for the servants. The finest painters and sculptors of the time immortalized the Yusupovs, and as such there are many beautiful portraits of the family in art collections today. One particular favorite seems to have been Valentin Serov, the best portraitist of his generation, who painted the famous portrait of Zinaida in her famous boudoir, and Felix with his beloved Gugus. The Yusupovs were extremely well-traveled for that time, even if they didn't often go abroad. They made visits to Berlin, Paris, Biarritz, Venice. Felix himself was sent on a tour of Italy in 1902, which remained in his memory more from the nightlife rather than the art. From early on, Felix proved to be quite a peculiar character for the time, and this becomes quite obvious from his memoir, where he openly admits his early fondness for cross-dressing, an extraordinary admission for the 1950s when the book was published. His first experience with cross-dressing was when he was 12 or 13. When he and his cousins slipped out one evening, when the Yusupovs were away, bedecked in Princess Zinaida's furs and pearls. Felix describes the story as an amusing anecdote in his memoirs, but in retrospective, it had a disturbing, seedy undertone. Imagine these 2 boys, 13 years old at most, dressed as women, walking the streets of St. Petersburg at night. When they passed on the Nevsky Prospect, a haunting ground for prostitutes, they were swarmed by dubious men and forced to take refuge in a restaurant. There, sitting at the table awkwardly in their furs, keep in mind, 12, 13-year-olds, the harassment continued as a group of equally dubious officers sent them a note inviting them to a private room. Bored, Felix started playing with his mother's string of pearls, swinging them around, aiming for the heads of the other guests. The strand of pearls eventually broke and scattered all over the restaurant, and, after having spent some time gathering them, they finally made it home. The next day, the restaurant manager sent the bill and a few missing pearls to the Moika Palace, and Felix's father was outraged when he found out what his son had been up to. It would be years before Felix would be allowed to see his cousin again. His second experience happened when he was spending time with his brother and his mistress Polia at her apartment. Nicholas and Polia wanted to go hear the Roma people sing, but didn't want to leave Felix behind, and so they dressed him up as a woman. To be fair, a lot of alcohol was involved in that decision. Felix was fascinated by the Roma culture and became a lifelong fan of their songs and dances. But that experience made him realize that in his disguise, he was able to go wherever he wanted and began going out at night dressed as an elegant woman. One particular anecdote he relates happened in Paris, where they went to a dress ball, Nicholas as a domino and Felix as a woman. While waiting for the ball to begin, they were idling away at the Théâtre des Capucines, where Felix suddenly noticed an older gentleman staring at him very persistently. It was King Edward VII, who sent a staff member to Nicholas to ask him who was the lovely creature he was with. Both brothers were terribly amused, but Felix also mentioned feeling flattered by the attention. Things continued to escalate. Knowing of his younger brother's talent for singing, Nicholas got him a job at a very exclusive cafe concert called the Aquarium. Felix was an enormous success and was smothered in flowers and love letters. Men he knew very well didn't recognize him and sent him dinner invitations. Interestingly enough, Felix writes that he longed to accept, but Nicholas forbade him. It should be clear by this time that Felix was, at the very least, bisexual, with a strong leaning towards men. It was so well known in Russian society, apparently, that Christopher Dobson, eminent biographer of the prince, mentions that his name became synonymous with batting for the other team. Felix himself doesn't hide it too much in his memoirs when he writes that evening, an officer in the guards, who was a famous Don Juan, courted me assiduously. The officer and 3 of his friends offered to take me to supper at the Bear. I accepted in spite of the risk, or rather, because of the risk, which thrilled me immensely. The aquarium escapades came to a close when friends of Princess Zinaida recognized him and his mother's famous jewels on him and revealed everything to his parents. The Yusupovs were outraged and scandalized that their son was cross-dressing, but Nicholas took the blame upon himself. Felix also blamed Nicholas for starting this, even though he noted numerous times that he very much enjoyed it. A word of caution is necessary at this point. Felix was known for his inclination towards the theatrical, and many historians suspected that he exaggerated, if not outright invented, some of the stories he wrote in his memoirs. His Russian biographer Elizaveta Krasnik was not able to corroborate the aquarium story in any way. Neither the newspapers of that time nor the diaries and letters of his and his brother's close friends make any mention of this scandalous incident. Historian Corinne Hall suspected that Felix might have even stolen anecdotes from his brother's life and passed them as his own, taking advantage of the fact that his parents and brother were no longer alive to correct him. Lacking a purpose higher than himself and being a second son to boot, Felix wandered aimlessly through life in search of new experiences. He smoked opium, dabbled in yoga and spiritualism, and in his own words, thought it quite natural to take his pleasure wherever he found it, without worrying what others might think. Our troubled protagonist had a total of 3 brothers, but 2 of them had died in the cradle, leaving him and his older brother Nicholas. Their relationship was complicated. Felix admired Nicholas's many attributes, among which were a talent for literature, theatre and music. Felix had been forced to learn the violin and had even been given a genuine Stradivarius from the family's collection to practice on, but in vain. The brothers also shared a dislike of most of the visitors who came by the Yusupov palace, considering them hypocrites. These visitors were snobbish and insisted on speaking French. If they deigned to speak Russian, they spoke it with a foreign accent, which infuriated the brothers. But Felix also writes that, as he grew up, he became overbearing and arrogant. The 5 years difference between them and their very different characters couldn't have helped either. Things would have continued the way they always had, and who knows, perhaps Russia's history would have been written differently if it wasn't for the incident which shook the Yusupov family to its core. It all began when Nicholas, a voracious ladies' man, met the great infatuation of his life, the lovely Countess Marina Alexandrovna de Heyden, daughter of Alexander Fyodorovich de Heyden, the head of the Tsar's chancellery. The drama about to unfold has everything: star-crossed lovers, love letters, despair, and a duel. For many years, the only authority on the details of the ensuing tragedy was Felix, who describes the events in his 1954 memoir, Lost Splendor. But Marina refused to disappear and let him have the last word, and in 1967, she published her memoir, called Rubies Bring Bad Luck. Very few people know about this book. It has never been translated from French, has long been out of print, and the few state libraries who have it are very reluctant to lend it per mail due to its rarity. But it is there for those who want to find out what happened, and that includes yours truly. And so I will try to reconstruct the events based on their writings, using one writer to fill in the gaps left by the other, and compare versions who do not match. Born in 1889, Marina was a very pretty, popular and charming girl whose main passions in life were fashion, balls and flirting. Nobody could have accused her of having intellectual inclinations. She had been a lazy, uninterested student, and she was known to be a rather silly creature, but her great beauty did much of the legwork necessary to cover up these deficiencies. And she knew it. Even with a broken nose, the result of a sledding accident, she considered herself one of the prettiest women of the day. I was interested only in my beauty, my conquests, my gorgeous clothes, and rank in society. Devourer of chocolates and compliments, I was frivolous, passionate about theatre and dance, reckless and disdainful of convention, and always in immense need of love. Nicholas had attracted her curiosity by ignoring her. They shared a passion for the theatre and ran in the same circles. Their first meeting took place at a dinner following a play directed by him. Marina was stunned when the young man did not pay her any compliments or attention, as she had come to expect from every man. Instead, he wandered away and did not address her a word for the rest of the evening. She became immediately infatuated. Unfortunately, the young woman was already engaged to a lieutenant in the Horse Guards by the name of Baron Arvid Manteuffel. She had met him at the Imperial Ballet some months before meeting Nicholas, and sparks had flown between them so instantly that the girl asked her mother that night whether she would approve if she married him. When he finally asked her, she wrote in her journal, "Arvid has asked me to be his wife. Count Manteuffel is not only handsome but fascinating as well. All my friends' mothers want him for a son-in-law. I am proud, and Mama will be so happy. Arvid belongs to one of the noblest families in the Baltic. He's rich, he has many castles. I will travel. I will go to Rome, to London, to Paris. But am I happy? Pleased, flattered, proud, yes. But is what I feel truly happiness? My head is too clear, my heart too calm, for this to be the bliss described in novels. I love Arvid well enough, bien, and this bien scratches at me like a thorn. My joy dies and a vague fear takes its place. This proud man with his military manners, who has asked me to share his life, is nothing like the Prince Charming of my dreams." Marina's doubts were deepened by Manteuffel's hot and cold behavior. He often left her alone to spend time gambling with his regiment and, knowing his big catch secured, he engaged in flirtations with other pretty girls. Unsure about her fiancé and obsessed with Nicholas, Marina eventually found herself more and more in love with her Yusupov prince. But her memoir provides a detail which Felix left out from this, that it was Felix who nudged Marina towards his brother by constantly telling her in their moments of privacy that Nicholas finds her beautiful and is in love with her. And yet, Nicholas's behavior did not reflect these words. Although he certainly found her attractive, he was mostly indifferent towards her. It's unclear when the two began their torrid love affair, as both Felix and Marina remain vague in their memoirs. There wasn't a person alive outside of the lovers who was pleased with the situation. The Yusupovs were scandalized and told Nicholas in no uncertain terms that he will never marry Marina. Baron Manteufel's brothers-in-arms urged him to do something to defend his honor, because this was making the whole regiment look bad. Felix intervened in an unexpected way and sent Marina to a mystic by the name of Chinsky. Her fiancé insisted on accompanying her. The mystic told them that they must break off their engagement and that the blood-red ruby on Marina's engagement ring will bring them misfortune. Felix, on the other hand, claims that he found out about this mystic only after rummaging through Nicholas's papers after his death. As the wedding date neared, Marina felt increasingly neglected by her fiancé and used the evenings when he was not there with her to see Nicholas at his theatre group. Interestingly enough, she mentioned that Felix's underhanded intrigues stimulated the affair, which amused him extravagantly. It was perfectly within Felix's character to toy with people and stir the pot for his amusement. During a tea at an aristocratic lady's house, Felix approached Marina and said, "I have a brilliant idea, Marina. Let's go to supper tonight at Contan, just the three of us. You, Nicholas and I, in a private room. You can't refuse this little party which may be our last. When you're married, it will be hard to find an occasion to meet like this. I've spoken to my brother and he's delighted to be able to see you once more." "What madness, Felix!" "Not so bad as you think, Dushka. I've thought this through carefully and you won't run a single risk. It will be easy for you to sneak out when everyone is asleep and my car will be waiting at your door. I give you my word that no one will know a thing. Later you can tell your husband about the escape himself. He'll be the first to laugh. Come now, Marina, a little pluck." But when Nicholas arrived hours later, he was taken aback by this risky idea and professed to know nothing of it. Marina would come to deeply regret having followed Felix's plan, and would later write, "My enemies later on accused me of having planned this clandestine supper organized by Felix the evening before my marriage." In his memoirs, Felix claimed something completely different. Nicholas was in despair about Marina's impending marriage. The girl wept and declared she would rather die than marry a man she did not love. I found out that she had asked Nicholas to have supper with her for one last time on the evening before the wedding. Having failed to persuade Nicholas not to go, I decided to go with him to the party. Later at night, Marina snuck out of her house and into Felix's awaiting car. Felix told her to change her cloak so she wouldn't be recognized, and gave her what he claimed was one of his mother's cloaks. It was horrible. Garish green velvet with gold embroidery and a mink color. It would have made its wearer stand out immediately. Marina thought briefly about how strange it was that a woman of such renowned good taste as Princess Zinaida should have this kind of garment, but her nerves were too shaken to give this much thought. Felix had planned this dangerous humiliation perfectly. As they entered the restaurant, they were immediately recognized by many people, including two close friends of Manteuffel. When they entered the private room Felix had booked, he took a menu and asked her to write a few words for Nicholas, so that he should know they arrived. The naive Marina scribbled, "Dear Count, I am waiting for you in room 5, Marina." Felix took the message and disappeared. After a while, a panicked Nicholas burst inside the room and told Marina that she must leave immediately. He was about to run to the car and grab his own, more discreet cloak, when suddenly Felix entered the room with a group of hired actors. Nicholas and Marina were trapped and awkwardly sat down. One of the hired actors then began to recite, surely at Felix's instruction. "My friends, we find ourselves tonight in the midst of a great drama. This young lady will marry a man she doesn't love. Her presence here attests to that. Not only she does not love him to whom she will be wed in a few hours, but she loves another. And," turning to Nicholas, "this man is you. Help me to save this child who you love too." This had an unexpected effect on Nicholas. White as a sheet, he said, "I was determined to take Marina home to avoid scandal, but without knowing it, you've spoken the truth." Then he turned to Marina and asked her to marry him. She accepted. Felix's devious prank had gone sideways. He erupted into a stream of protests, but in vain. After Nicholas left the room to get Marina's cloak, Felix descended upon her and told her, "This joke has gone on long enough. You cannot marry my brother, Marina. Understand this well. He doesn't love you. He has never loved you. He loves someone else. This game he plays is pure Don Quixote. Your marriage is over. Nicholas keeps his freedom, and as for his head, it's taken. You must give him up, and as for marriage to Manteuffel, it's become impossible. Feign sickness if you must to avoid a scandal that will threaten us all." Felix's eyes burned through me. I have never seen such evil eyes as those that stared at me except the blind eye of a beacon. Felix, however, describes the events differently. At the restaurant, Vova, the actor, was among the guests and, after he had drunk a good deal, he launched into an impassioned speech and exhorted the lovers to place their love before any other consideration. When the weeping fiancée begged Nicholas to elope with her, I rushed off to fetch her mother. In her two-part article on the Yusupov the Heyden affair, Gretchen Haskin writes, "What accounted for Felix's change of heart? After weeks of insinuating himself into his brother's affairs, creating a not unwelcome rift between Nicholas, the favourite son, and his father, after countless hours spent whispering intrigues into Marina's ear, after the fulsome evening he had just created, Felix, the giddy matchmaker, had lost control of his players. What he had intended as a prank, which at most infuriated his family and propelled his brother into another unseemly affair, had suddenly exploded into a scandal which would stain the Yusupov name and bring misery to his adored mother. That his role in the disaster would become known was a given. The kitten that had amused him so excessively had become a tiger whose tail he held between his delicate fingers, to whom he could turn before they were all devoured. Nicholas telephoned Marina, who had been taken home, and begged her not to marry Manteuffel that day, but Marina refused. She and the Baron married in a wedding which seemed both strange and sinister to her, and they went off on their honeymoon to Paris. Nicholas followed them under a flimsy pretext. The lovers reunited and appeared in public at the opera, causing a sensation. Manteuffel was forced to finally confront Nicholas. He wanted to send his new wife with her mother to Finland, where they would stay for a year. If his wife's feelings persisted, he would consider a divorce. Nicholas agreed, but the departure did not happen. Instead, the lovers continued to meet in public, with Marina openly being seen as his mistress. Worried, the Yusupov sent Felix to keep his brother out of trouble, but this did little to alleviate their fears. Soon, Felix summoned them urgently to Paris. Although described as gentle and serene by Felix in his memoirs, Marina experienced a different side of Princess Zinaida. Cold as ice, she told the young woman, "My son has told me about his conversation with Count Manteuffel. I don't find your husband's words pleasing at all, but your place is with him. Divorce is out of the question. As for Nicholas, believe me, he will forget you in a month. My son is passionate, but his love affairs don't last long. Remember, I have the pleasure of knowing him longer than you." Baron Manteuffel was furious and angrily read out to Marina mocking press articles which describe his wife's affair in the most lurid and exaggerated terms. Once again, he demanded that she leave Paris. Additionally, he personally visited the Yusupovs and assured them that this unfortunate situation was his wife's fault and that he was going to ask for a divorce. But when the newlyweds returned to St. Petersburg, the situation had not improved. Marina and Nicholas simply could not stay away from each other. The officers of Manteufel's regiment had a serious talk with him. A witness to Marina's fateful and strange dinner with Nicholas the night before her wedding produced the menu she had foolishly scribbled on and which Felix had taken. Why was he alright with being cuckolded in front of the whole world? His honor and that of the regiment was at stake. He had to challenge Nicholas to a duel. And so he did. They would face each other on the Krestovsky island estate of Prince Serge Belosesky, July 5th, 1908, at dawn. The night before the duel, Nicholas sat down and penned the following letter to his lover. "My dear Marina, by the time this letter reaches you, I shall be dead. I believe that you love me, and my last thought will be of you. I hope you believe me, as I would not lie to you before my death. I loved you, my little Marina, because you're not like anybody else, and never thought of behaving like others, always following the correct path set before you. Society does not like such people. They have mud and stones thrown at them. You, as a weak little woman, cannot prevail against them alone. Your life, as well as mine, is spoiled. We met at an unfortunate time which has ruined us both. You will never be happy, since it is unlikely that another will appear who will understand you as I did. I understand you easily, as we are so alike. How happy we could have been together. Forgive me for the lack of style in this letter. It contains several phrases that fail to tie together. I write what is in my mind with little regard for style. I find it very hard that I cannot see you before my death, and that I cannot say farewell and tell you how much I love you. Just think how terrible it is to die for you without even knowing whether you are thinking of me at that moment. Marina, my dear Marina, you do not know how much I love you. It is now 5 o'clock. In 2 hours my seconds will come to take me away, and I will never see you again. Why are you so far away? You will not hear from me as I pronounce your name for the last time. I do not even have your photograph that I could kiss. I have only a small lock of hair that I hold sacred. That is all. I do not fear death, but it is hard for me to die far from you without seeing you for the last time. Farewell forever. I love you. Marina is on her family's estate in Juistila, Finland, when she receives a cold letter from her father, informing her of Nicholas's death. He had died instantly, shot through the heart. The letter ended with the words, "May merciful God help you in this tragedy which you have provoked." Desperate to see Nicholas one last time, even if it was in a coffin, Marina rushed to St. Petersburg and hastily penned the letter to Felix, begging him to let her pray at the coffin late at night, and to retrieve her letters to Nicholas, a locket containing her hair, and several other mementos of him. Felix gave no reply. Marina never forgave him. Even at 80 years old, her enmity towards him never withered, and she still had in her mind how the perverse curve of his lips gave to his angelic features a peculiar hardness. I cannot recall in all my life a creature so superbly and perfectly insolent. I will not do like other writers and accuse Felix of deliberately orchestrating his brother's death so he could become the sole heir of the endless family fortune. I believe, like Gretchen Haskin, that he was a very bored, selfish young man who loved to toy with others for his amusement, and whose pranks took a very unfortunate turn. But this doesn't change the fact that he played an important part in the tragedy, and has never acknowledged that or expressed any remorse. The family retreated to their estate of Arkhangelskoye to mourn. Princess Zinaida was never the same after her son's death. Her husband bore the pain in iron silence. Never the most stable person to begin with, the 21-year-old Felix was caught between exultation at the thought that he will one day be the richest man in Russia, and shame at having that feeling after his brother's death. He claimed he would have put an end to his days if he hadn't been so reluctant to cause his parents more grief. In dire need of guidance, Felix headed over to Moscow to meet with Grand Duchess Elizabeth Feodorovna, sister of the Tsarina and granddaughter of Queen Victoria. 3 years before, her husband, Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich, had been assassinated. Having found solace in religion, the Grand Duchess renounced her worldly goods, became a nun, and spent her days caring for the sick and trying to help the poor. She proved to be a good influence on him, soothing him with the words, "True happiness is something that neither men nor events can take from you. You will find it in faith, in hope, and in charity. Try to make those around you happy, and you will be happy yourself." Inspired, Felix devoted himself to caring for the sick and poor, and claims he planned to give away most of his fortune. His parents were strongly against this, and moreover wanted to see him settle down. But marriage was not in the cards for Felix. Not only did he believe himself too young, but he had a marked preference for men. Eager to detach himself from his parents' grip, he enrolled in Oxford, even though his English was incredibly poor. At one point, when he returned to Russia to spend Christmas with his family, his father was so pleased with the animals his son had bought in England that he asked him to purchase more. Obligingly, Felix sent a telegram to the livestock seller in English. "Please send me 1 man cow and 3 Jersey women." Unfortunately for Felix, a journalist somehow caught wind of the telegram and published it in the English papers. Felix's English friends were terribly amused. Felix himself did not have any pretensions about his education and related the incident in his memoir. But what's interesting is that there is never any hint of embarrassment in his writing. He finds everything amusing. Everything just rolls off of him like water off a duck's wing. It bears all the markers of class psychology. Everything about him, his temperament and behavior, makes a lot of sense if one realizes that he was never put in a situation where he had to defend his social position. He had nothing to prove to the world. His social identity as a prince, a man with access to the highest royal circles and the richest heir in Russia, remained rock solid as he glided through his early 20s. People like him could afford self-mockery because their dignity was naturally assumed to be non-negotiable. In 1909, Felix's curiosity determined him to seek the acquaintance of a man who intrigued what felt like the whole of St. Petersburg, a peasant from the windswept Siberian steppes called Grigory Rasputin. The meeting left Felix with a strange impression. He was instantly put off by Rasputin's unwarranted familiar manner. He resented being called dear boy by the older man and ascribed a certain wicked, crafty and sensual quality to him. Back at Oxford, Felix openly admitted that he wasn't really interested in learning, but in meeting new and interesting people. For him, this was an opportunity for expanding his social circle. In his second year, Felix moved out of the dorms and rented a house which he shared with two of his fellow students. He rented a piano, brought in his own chef from Russia, had a French chauffeur, an English valet, and a housekeeper. For a masked ball at Albert Hall, he purchased a bolt of 16th century gold brocade and had a magnificent costume made out of it, with which he caused a sensation. He personally knew many of the era's most glamorous characters, from prima ballerinas such as Anna Pavlova, socialites, composers, crowned heads such as King Manuel of Portugal. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that many of his acquaintances now have Wikipedia pages. He burst on our world like a man from out of space, recalled the writer Reginald Merton. He was a magnificent-looking person, very well groomed, extremely well dressed. One of his friends remarked that Felix lacked in a curious way the faculty of judging people's character. He likes everybody who's nice to him, and as everybody's always nice to him, he takes the whole world into his good graces. And yet at the same time, he's tremendously reserved. You never know exactly where you stand. Felix himself explained that this reserve was caused by his general detachment. He made friends easily, but just as easily discarded them. It remains a fact that the power I have always had of attracting people, though quite out of proportion to my own merits, has had far-reaching consequences for myself and for others. I admit that for a time this both flattered and amused me, but it soon paled, because it was too easy and there was too much of it. When I felt myself being carried forward on a wave of destiny, I did not bother much about the friends I left behind. His chief concern during his time at Oxford seems to have been having fun and decorating his apartment. He had quite the eye for interior design, and he proudly noted in his memoirs how the hanging lamp he chose gave his female visitors the delicate semi-transparency of porcelain. He recalled the furnishings, their materials, and their colours in astonishing detail. Author Corinne Hall described Felix's final months at Oxford beautifully in her book, Rasputin's Assassin and His Romanov Princess. They were frivolous, wide-tie months of theatres, dinners, nightclubs and escapades, the sort of life that was soon to be killed forever by the First World War, along with the young men who lived it to the full. Back in Russia, Felix could not escape the marriage market. Everybody, from his mother to the Tsarina Alexandra, were pressuring this reluctant bachelor to choose a wife, and she did not hesitate to appear. One day, when I was out riding, I met a very beautiful girl accompanied by an elderly lady. Our eyes met, and she made such an impression on me that I reined in my horse to gaze at her as she walked on. Every day I went riding on the same road at the same hour, hoping to meet the lovely stranger again. But one afternoon, the Grand Duke and the Grand Duchess Alexander called on us, accompanied by their daughter, the Princess Irina. To my surprise and delight, I recognized the girl I had met on my ride. This time, I had plenty of time to admire the wondrous beauty of the girl who was eventually to become my wife and lifelong companion. She had beautiful features, clear-cut as a cameo, and looked very like her father. With her dazzling beauty, imperial pedigree, and sweet character, Irina was one of the most eligible young women in Russia. Like Felix, she was artistic, had impeccable taste, and, having grown up with 6 brothers, lacked certain traits which usually irritated Felix in women, such as pettiness and dishonesty. Or at least, that's the explanation he gives in his memoirs. In many ways, though, she and Felix were opposites. He was gregarious and sociable, whereas her extreme shyness was sometimes mistaken for coldness. He was very worldly and eccentric, whereas Irina was incredibly innocent and did not even know that same-sex attraction existed. Felix claims in his memoirs that he and his fiancée wanted no secrets between them, and thus he resolved to tell her everything about him. I concealed nothing in my past life from her, and, far from being perturbed by what I told her, she showed great tolerance and comprehension, he writes. But author Corinne Hall makes the point of asking just how much did someone so innocent like Irina could have truly understood about Felix's lifestyle. It's very difficult for us as a modern society to understand the level of innocence nurtured in a young woman of that time. For example, women went to the altar without having the slightest understanding of what happened during the wedding night. And Irina was engaged to someone who, through his bisexuality, which leaned heavily towards men, added a layer of complication with which many other women did not have to confront themselves. The engagement itself was not without trouble. The handsome Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich had also courted Irina, and his friendship with Felix was never the same after losing her. Although the rumor mill was busy at work suggesting that there had been something between Dmitry and Felix in the first place, and that the quarrel was not for Irina, but caused by Dmitry's jealousy. Felix himself makes a curious comment in his memoirs. Shortly after our arrival in the Crimea, our engagement was at last made public. Some of the letters and telegrams that poured in gave me a good deal to think about. I had never dreamed that any of my friends could be so much affected by my marriage. This begs the question, why would his so-called friends be so affected by Felix's marriage? It almost sounds as if he was receiving mail from spurned lovers, rather than the congratulations one usually receives on such occasions. He goes as far as to interpret some of his friends' attempts to prevent this marriage, the main culprit being Dmitry, who whispered in the ear of Irina's father, as misguided affection. About these friends he writes, "I would have liked to do something for them, were it only to substitute for the love I could not give them the more precious gift of friendship." Felix's complicated and unorthodox personal life nearly cost him his engagement. Grand Duke Alexander, Irina's father, once informed of Felix's proclivities, cancelled the engagement, only to have Felix push through with his usual charm and regain his confidence. The wedding date was set for February 22nd, 1914. Irina spent the night before her wedding crying. Although madly in love with her bridegroom, it was difficult for her, so young, to leave her home, her parents, and her siblings. Her youngest brother, Vasily, was only 6 years old. The magnificent wedding that followed would be the last hurrah of Tsarist Russia, a glittering dream in the gathering twilight of the empire. Irina wore an elegant white satin gown, a rock crystal and diamond tiara made by Cartier, a gift from Felix, and a bouquet of lilacs and orchids. Felix cut a dashing figure in his black and white uniform of the nobility. And yet, even though the air smelled of incense and spring flowers from the imperial greenhouses, even though this was a joyous occasion for the lovely, happy couple, there was something in the air. Years later, wedding guest Mariel Buchanan, daughter of the British ambassador to Russia, would write, "The bride, with the classical purity of her features, was very beautiful. The bridegroom in his gold-braided coat was very good-looking. There was a glitter of jewels and decorations, of brilliant uniforms and the women's gaily colored dresses. And yet somehow there was at the same time a strange feeling of doom and impending tragedy. as if the menace of the coming years was already casting a shadow on all the people assembled in that brightly lighted room, while outside the windows, the snow-covered streets, the frozen river, the teeming workers waited breathlessly for all this splendor to pass away. Their wedding presents included 29 perfect diamonds from the Tsar and a permission to use the imperial box at the theatre, a request made by Felix, of course. Drunk with happiness, the couple went on a prolonged honeymoon to Paris, Cairo, Jerusalem, Naples, Rome, Florence, Milan. But as the year marched on, the shadow of the First World War began to creep onto the scene. July found Felix and Irina visiting Felix's parents in Bad Kissingen, Germany. Suddenly, a relative sent an urgent telegram to Irina, telling her to get out of the country immediately, but she and Felix failed to act on time, and when the war broke out a short time afterwards, Felix was arrested at the hotel where they were staying. Both Felix's father and Irina tried to pull all the strings they could reach. Irina's cousin, Crown Princess Cecily of Germany, relayed a message from the Kaiser. They were now prisoners of war and had to stay in Germany until the end of the conflict. Fortunately for them, the Russian ambassador, Sergei Sverbeyev, organized a special train to take his embassy staff out of the country and agreed to take the Yusupovs with him. As they were being driven to the train station in the embassy car, they were surrounded by a jeering, angry mob of Germans. Fortunately, as their car was last, the mob thought that they were servants and did not attack them the way they did the other Russians. They reached Russia on the 8th of August, without a single piece of luggage, shaken and tired. The honeymoon had been quite an adventure, but it had achieved something else. Irina was pregnant. On the political front, things were going very poorly in Europe. The assassination of the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife in June was one of the many triggers of the catastrophe that was the First World War. Russia entered the fray on the side of its ally, Serbia. Felix was very much a lover, not a fighter, and so he took full advantage of the law that allowed only sons to avoid military service. Longing to be useful, he converted many of the Yusupov palaces into hospitals and convalescent homes. This was no small feat, and even a Yusupov fortune could not support this financial effort easily. The family decided to sell one of their cars, their motorboat, and take a mortgage in order to gather the necessary capital to keep their hospitals running. Felix's aversion to the battlefront did not go unnoticed. The eldest daughter of the Tsar, Grand Duchess Olga, herself involved in tending to the wounded soldiers, visited him and Irina once and wrote the following scathing passage in a letter to her father. Felix is a downright civilian, dressed all in brown, walked to and fro about the room searching in some bookcases with magazine and virtually doing nothing. An utterly unpleasant impression he makes, a man idling in such times. On the 21st of March, 1915, after a difficult labor, Irina gave birth to a baby girl, whom she christened after herself, but her nickname within the family would be Bébé. Felix was very fond of his little girl, who physically resembled him and, in a repeat of his own christening experience, was nearly drowned in the font by the priest. Irina took a long time to recover after the birth. Unlike her robust mother, who had given birth to a whopping 7 children, Irina was thin and delicate. The birth left her with a host of health problems, especially with her kidneys. For many months afterwards, she kept losing weight, causing her family to worry about her. Although the elder Yusupovs hoped for more grandchildren, especially a boy to carry on the precious family name, after Bébé, there would be no more offspring. One of the possible reasons for this, namely Irina's health, I have already mentioned. The second possible reason is somewhat outlandish. Corinne Hall mentions in her joint biography of Felix and Irina that they decided to not have more than one child in order to thwart Prince Grigory's curse. It was a curious family legend which claimed that due to the Yusupovs converting to Christianity in 1718, only one heir in each generation would survive past the age of 26. And if one looks at the Yusupov family tree, one can understand why the family would take it seriously. Felix's great-grandfather Boris Nikolaevich Yusupov had 3 children, 2 of which died in the cradle. His son Nikolai had 3 children, but only Princess Zinaida survived. And of her 4 sons, only Felix lived to see 26. By letting Bebe, who was a 7th-generation Yusupov, be an only child, Felix and Irina might have hoped to avoid tragedy, even if it came at the expense of the family name. The modern audiences might scoff at this idea that such educated people would believe in these things, but one of the more paradoxical aspects of Russian society of that time was how intensely religious and yet deeply superstitious it was. The aristocracy in particular believed in curses, prophecies, the occult, and tried to assign meaning to events. For example, friends of the Yusupov predicted that Felix would be cheerful and a gifted dancer, because the day before he was born, Princess Zinaida had been to a ball and had danced the whole night. The third possible reason would be Felix's natural inclinations. Predictably, his affairs with men did not stop after his wedding. His wife could not have been happy with this, but as Christopher Dobson writes, "It is remarkable that when Irina came to understand her husband's true nature, she still loved him. She treated his need for men as another woman might understand her husband's need for a mistress, accepting it as something she could do nothing about without breaking up their marriage. Felix was always grateful for her understanding, and he treated her with infinite courtesy and respect, and, in its truest sense, with love." Felix's granddaughter would underline how happy their marriage had been, and to an extent it must have been true. But one must not underestimate how difficult and lonely it must have been for Irina to find herself in such a position. The situation in Russia went from bad to worse. Tsar Nicholas, weak, ineffective, and highly susceptible to the demands of his beloved German wife Alexandra, blundered from one bad decision to the next. Their position could not have been more delicate. After 4 daughters, Alexandra had finally produced the long-desired heir, Alexei, in 1904. But their joy was short-lived when they realized that their son was suffering from hemophilia and would probably not live long. Very few people knew of this painful secret. The public at large was not informed. The disease first appeared as a mutation in Alexandra's grandmother, Queen Victoria, who then, unknowingly through her many children, spread it to the other royal houses of Europe. Victoria and her husband Prince Albert had dreamed of a Europe without war, and had hoped that, if all the royal houses were related, then they wouldn't go to war against each other, and so they were eager to form alliances through their offspring for the sake of Great Britain and Europe both. Little Alexei suffered greatly during his short life. The disease was debilitating and merciless, and there was nothing anyone could do at the time to cure or even to alleviate it. Any parent's nightmare. Many times the Tsar and his wife had to sit helplessly by the bedside of their son and watch him agonize, powerless to help. This was the open door Rasputin used to infiltrate the royal family. Famed for his powers as a healer and holy man, this strange hypnotic peasant from the Siberian steppes was summoned to help with Alexei. Historians debate to this day how he managed to help the boy. Due to the secrecy of the situation, few details have been written down. What is certain is that Nicholas and Alexandra became convinced that Rasputin was capable of saving their son. Alexandra became a fanatical supporter of Rasputin and would not tolerate a single bad word against him. She became estranged from her own sister, her friends, and would not hesitate to cut anyone out of her life if they dared criticize "our friend," as she called him. Much has been written and spoken about the so-called Mad Monk. He was by all accounts an unsavory, lascivious, arrogant and dark figure, full of appetites. It's astonishing how willfully blind the Tsar and Tsarina were in the face of the evidence gathered by Rasputin's critics. At the end of August 1915, the Tsar made the grave misstep of taking control of the armed forces, meaning that he would be personally made responsible by the people for any losses Russia suffered, and that he would be away from the capital, leaving his unpopular wife, and by extension Rasputin, in charge. It's difficult to describe the atmosphere of paranoia in Russia at the time. There was a massive anti-German sentiment throughout the capital, as many powerful Baltic nobles and industry heads had German family names, even if they themselves were as Russian as vodka. This was made worse by the fact that the Tsarina herself was of German descent. Alexandra had never been popular to begin with. Her introversion and shyness were interpreted as coldness and arrogance. She was socially awkward and wooden, and did not fit in with the Russian joie de vivre. The aristocrats wanted to have balls, love affairs, and gossip, while the conservative Tsarina thought this was inappropriate and unsuccessfully attempted to change the social climate. The aristocrats saw her as a self-important bore. The common people saw her as a foreign agent and resented her for many years due to her perceived failure of producing an heir. When she gave birth at 25 to her daughter Tatiana in 1897, she burst into tears and said, "My God, it is again a daughter. What will the nation say? What will the nation say?" She also firmly believed that God had placed her in her role and did not think that it was her job to win the people over. This would be the last great delusion of the old order. Not knowing the true reason behind Rasputin's close relationship with the Tsarina and knowing his seedy reputation, people began to suspect him of having an affair with her. After all, why else would he constantly be in the palace? The extent of his carnal corruption was also said to include the imperial couple's 4 daughters, the Grand Duchesses Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia. None of that was true, but he was smearing the imperial family by association. It did not help that he constantly boasted about his position and influence in the most crass and disgusting terms to people who gladly carried his words to the ears of the Russian nobility. They utterly despised and hated this upstart peasant who was, in their eyes, doing nothing but harm to their ruling dynasty. But all their attempts of getting rid of him failed spectacularly, and by 1915, there was already a feeling of pure dread in the air. Conspiracy theories swirled around the elegant St. Petersburg salons. "I cannot imagine how all this will end," wrote Felix to his mother. "We live on a volcano. The same thoughts pass again and again in our heads." In his memoirs, he would write that the situation at the front became more and more serious, and the Tsar grew weaker and weaker under the influence of drugs administered to him daily by order Rasputin, whose power had reached its zenith. Not content with dismissing and appointing ministers and generals and attacking the highest dignitaries of the church, he had formed a plan to remove the Tsar from the throne, replace him by the sick little Tsarevich, proclaim the Tsarina regent, and sign a separate peace with Germany. Whether this was true or not doesn't really matter. This is what some people genuinely believed, that their country was in deep turmoil and that it needed to be saved. And it was around that time that the idea of murder began to take shape in Felix's mind. All hope of his leaving without our having to resort to violence now seemed vain. He knew his power and believed himself absolutely safe. The idea of a bribe had to be abandoned, for he obviously had ample means, and if it was true that he was working for the Germans, even though he was perhaps only half aware of the fact, he could get infinitely larger sums from them than any we could offer him. My military training at the Corps des Pages left me very little free time. I went home tired but could not rest. I was possessed by the haunting memory of Rasputin. I tried to weigh up his responsibility. In my mind's eye, I pictured the monstrous plot against Russia, of which he was the moving spirit. Did he realize what he was doing? The idea harassed me. For hours on end, I went over everything I knew about him, trying to understand the contradictions in his character and to find excuses for his infamous behavior. Then once again a flood of indignation swept over me as I remembered his licentiousness, his incredible unscrupulousness, and above all, his abominable hypocrisy towards the imperial family. Gradually, however, a clearer, simpler picture of Rasputin took shape in my mind. He was just an uncultured, cynical, avid, and unscrupulous peasant who had reached the pinnacle of power owing to a chain of circumstances. His boundless influence over the Tsar and Tsarina, the adoration of his female admirers, his continual orgies, and the idleness in which he lived and to which he was not accustomed, had completely destroyed what good remained in him. While Rasputin was decidedly not the picture of a virtuous moral person by any means, one has to wonder if Felix ever realized that he possessed many of the vices he decried in his description of the monk. In him, they were just packaged more prettily. He had spent most of his life in pleasant idleness and pleasure-seeking without caring who he hurt, helped nurture the events that eventually spun out of control and led to his brother's death, was generally uninterested in learning, and his good looks, charm and wealth had granted him a vast number of adoring admirers, both men and women. The similarities are undeniable. Getting rid of Rasputin through violence was not an original idea. It crystallized as a response to the crisis in which the nobility found itself, and judging by the enthusiastic response the idea received, this must have been on quite a few minds for quite some time. It should be clear by now that Felix Yusupov was not anybody's idea of an assassin. He loathed violence and was much more suited to planning a fun night out rather than a political killing. In his memoir, he would ponder this curious contrast himself. "I have repeatedly stated that I am by nature a peaceful man. The very idea of spilling blood fills me with horror. Yet the more I thought about it, the more convinced I was that I would have to conquer my personal feelings in this matter." His search for accomplices found many willing participants. The first was his own wife, Princess Irina, who agreed to act as bait and lure Rasputin to the Moika Palace. Another one was his friend and young cousin of the Tsar, the delicate Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, with whom he had mended fences since their falling out over Irina's hand. The other co-conspirators were Lieutenant Sergei Mikhailovich Sukhotin, who had recovered in the Yusupov infirmary in St. Petersburg and ended up working at the hospital in Korets. He was therefore on very friendly terms with Felix and Irina. A member of the Imperial Duma, the lower house of the legislature in the Russian Empire, also joined the plot. His name was Vladimir Purishkevich. He had caught Felix's eye when he made a passionate speech against Rasputin and the Tsarina, begging his colleagues to open the Tsar's eyes to the reality of the situation. He not only readily agreed to the assassination, but brought in someone else, the Polish doctor Stanislav Sergeyevich Lazoverth, who would provide and administer the poison with which they decided to kill Rasputin. What a crew! The men believed, rather naively, that once Rasputin disappeared, the Tsar would wake up and turn into a good constitutional monarch and that all will be well. In their minds, they were saving their beloved Russia. Shockingly enough, Irina, the sweet, innocent Irina, was more than willing to help her husband and his co-conspirators in their plot. In fact, she was adamant that she had to be there. "Don't you dare do anything without me," she wrote to her husband, "or I shall not come at all." But eventually, the reality of what she had committed to consumed her. She suffered an emotional breakdown and refused to come to St. Petersburg, writing a tearful letter to Felix. "Forgive me, my dear one. Don't be angry with me. Please don't be angry. I love you terribly. I can't live without you." But Felix didn't need Irina's actual presence at the Moika Palace. He just needed her permission to claim that she was there, a permission which was readily given to him. The plan was simple. Felix was to invite Rasputin late at night to his Moika Palace under the guise of meeting the famously lovely Irina. He would be picked up from his 5-room apartment on the Street of Peace and driven to the Yusupov Palace. Felix would then lead the monk into an elegantly furnished basement and served him poisoned wine and cakes. After the poison would take effect, Sukhotin would pretend to be Rasputin by putting on the monk's distinctive overcoat and cap, and be driven in Purishkevich's open car by Dmitry and the doctor back to the house on the Street of Peace. This way, they were hoping to trick the secret police who was always trailing Rasputin for protection and for surveillance. Finally, they would return to the Moika and Dmitry's closed car and dispose of the body by weighing it down with stones and secretly throwing it into the Neva River. The date was set for December 30th. The year 1916 was about to end with a bang. The execution of this plan went as poorly as one would expect from a bunch of amateurs. Both Felix and Purishkevich talked to at least 6 people about their plan weeks before the event was supposed to take place. Purishkevich approached the lawyer Vasily Maklakov on December 11th in the crowded lobby of the Duma and openly told him the details of their plot. Author Christopher Dobson writes that it was like discussing a murder in the lobby of the House of Commons. Rasputin himself couldn't help but brag to several of his followers, including the Tsarina's closest confidant Anna Vryubova, that he was invited to the Moika palace to meet the Tsar's niece. Therefore, the Tsarina found out about this planned visit before it even happened, and told Vryubova that there must be some mistake. Irina is still in the Crimea. Were these men not afraid of being caught, one might ask? Well, at least Felix and Dmitri felt particularly safe. Felix could legally deny the police access to his home because the residences of members of the imperial family could not be searched, and his wife happened to be the Tsar's niece. He was also counting on his social position and proximity to the Tsar to shield him from any truly unpleasant consequences. As for Dmitri, as a Grand Duke and the Tsar's cousin, he probably felt untouchable. In Imperial Russia, members of the Tsar's family could not be arrested except on the Tsar's direct orders, no matter what they did. They had a degree of inviolability difficult for us to imagine. Their cars could not be stopped, their houses could not be searched, and they answered not to the people or the state for any crimes they committed, but only to the Tsar. And it was because they had this extraordinary privilege that their conduct was expected to be exemplary. And so what followed said a lot about the sorry state of Russian society of that time. What actually happened that night in the basement of the Moika Palace remains somewhat unclear. The plotters wrote conflicting accounts of the events, and Felix's own account would change over the years. Historians argue to this day about who was really present, if foreign powers like the British intelligence were involved, what details are more credible, the order of events, and so on and so forth. I cannot and do not claim to possess a perfect account of the assassination. But everything that has been written points to a poorly executed, almost darkly comical scene. Rasputin ingested poisoned cakes and drank glass after glass of poisoned wine without seemingly feeling any ill effects, while his stressed Felix watched aghast. At least once, the prince ran up the stairs in a panic to consult with his fellow would-be assassins. Eventually, Felix took Dmitri's revolver and, taking advantage of a moment when Rasputin was looking at a crystal crucifix, shot him in the back. The monk screamed and collapsed. The conspirators burst into the room, but in their haste they accidentally turned off the light, and one of them bumped into Felix and screamed. It was like something out of a black comedy. The men bent over the body to examine it. The doctor declared Rasputin officially dead, and so they all went upstairs, locking the body in the basement. Our hearts were full of hope, for we were convinced that what had just taken place would save Russia and the dynasty from ruin and dishonor, writes Felix in his memoir. The plan, however, was only halfway done. After Dmitri had left with Sukhotin and Dr. Latsovert on their decoy mission, Felix decided to go to the basement and check on the corpse again, plagued by an eerie feeling. He didn't know how to check for signs of life other than by shaking the body as hard as he could. To his horror, Rasputin's eyes flew open. And now the dark comedy turns into horror. Felix claimed that Rasputin jumped to his feet and grabbed him by the shoulder. He was foaming at the mouth and looking wildly at the prince, repeating his name over and over again. Terrified, Felix ran upstairs, calling for Purishkevich to help, who grabbed his revolver and rushed downstairs, where he was greeted with the image of Rasputin on all fours, crawling away into the courtyard. The adrenaline made the wounded man stand up and run towards the gate. Purishkevich fired and missed. He fired again, another miss. Desperate and aware that time was slipping away, Purishkevich bit his left hand with all his force to concentrate and fired again. Rasputin stopped. The target had been hit. Purishkevich fired a fourth and last bullet. The monk collapsed and did not move again. But the half-moon above was not the only witness to this act. Startled by the shots, two servants had woken up and rushed into the courtyard, joined by a policeman from a nearby police station who happened to hear the commotion. Felix immediately went into damage management mode. He blocked the officer's view of the body and told him that there was nothing to worry about, just one of his drunk guests firing a revolver into the air. Although seemingly accepting of this story at first, The officer returned a short while later because his superiors had not found the story convincing and sent him to get the full picture. To Felix's horror, Puryshkevich proudly declared, "I am Vladimir Mitropanovich Puryshkevich, member of the Duma. The shots you heard killed Rasputin. If you love your country and your Tsar, you'll keep your mouth shut." The shocked officer outwardly agreed, but he was so convinced that the two men before him were drunk and making fun of him that upon returning to the police station, he made a full report to his superiors. When Dmitri and the others returned, they carried nothing but bad news. They had failed to burn Rasputin's coat and hat because Puryshkevich's wife had refused to unpick the stitches so that it could be fed piece by piece into the stove. The final nail in their coffin of incompetence was when it was time to dispose of the body. Leaving Felix, who was in a terrible state, at the Moika Palace, Dmitri and the others drove to the bridge leading to the Petrovsky Island. In his biography of Felix, Christopher Dobson writes the following: "The aristocrat, the parliamentarian, the doctor and the soldier set about pushing the body of their peasant victim over the 4-foot-high parapet. They failed at first, but then heaved the corpse over and it splashed into the ice-fringed water. They hurdled the bundle of clothes after their owner, but suddenly realized that they had forgotten to load his body with the chains and weights which would have sunk it to the bottom of the river. As they drove away, fearful they had been seen, they also discovered they had forgotten one of Rasputin's overshoes. They decided to burn it. It is illustrative of the way of life in Russia at the time that when they arrived at the Grand Duke Dmitri's palace, he ordered one of his servants to burn it. It would not have occurred to him to do it himself, despite the risk of being compromised by the servant. The men thought they were being clever by using Dmitri's limousine to move the body because, due to it bearing the personal ensign of the Grand Duke, it could not be stopped by the police. Dobson, however, points out that the fact that every policeman it passed would, as a matter of routine, report the car's movements seems to have escaped the plotters. Was there ever a gaggle of more incompetent assassins? If these men were in any way representative of the people in charge of Russia, no wonder the country was in shambles. None of the futile attempts the men made to cover their tracks had any effect whatsoever, and the next day seemingly everybody in St. Petersburg began to piece together the events of the previous night with ease. The Yusupov letter archive of the Our Epoch Museum in Moscow shows the reaction of the empire to the murder. There was a flurry of congratulatory letters received by Felix. A priest wrote to him that, "We bow before your courage in defending the honor and dignity of Russia. It is necessary to uproot the dark forces, not only Rasputin, but also Varna, Mardariev, the Ignatiev countesses, and others who sell Russia and insult the honor of families, wives, and daughters. Do not stop at Rasputin alone." Interesting sentiments coming from a priest. A sister of mercy with initials VK writes to Felix, "I have just returned from the front. Oh, if you only knew, Prince, what jubilation there is among soldiers, officers, and simple people who know the truth. Thank you, a Russian thank you to you, dear glorious Prince, for delivering Russia from disgrace. What a marvelous, what a wonderful deed you have accomplished. You proclaimed a bright resurrection. You shook all of Russia, and all of great Russia, not a shameful one, bows to you." Felix's cousin, Mikhail Nikolaevich Sumarokov-Elston, wrote, "So, it is done. Honor and glory to you, my dear boy. It is difficult to describe what happened in Odessa when they learned of his death. The rector of the university proposed that a lifetime monument be erected to you. You were called the second gatherer of the Russian lands." Yet another letter showered praise onto Felix. "Your Serene Highness, I bow low to the ground before you for your deed and kiss the hand that freed our dear homeland from shame and disgrace. Signed, daughter of an old guardsman and a battle general, a Russian woman, one of many." But not everybody was pleased. There were also threats, such as this letter. "Count, for the villainous murder of Grigory Rasputin committed in your home, by decision of the committee White Coal, you, together with your entire company and also your family, are sentenced to destruction by means of poison or firearm, without indication of the term for execution of this decision, and at any convenient opportunity for carrying out this order by our agents, even if it should take 20, 30 years. And there was one anonymous letter addressed to Irina, dated early January 1917, in which someone expresses their consternation and disbelief at someone like her having been involved in the plot. There were no refutations of what occurred in your mansion, the Yusupov's house on the Moika, and meanwhile, one cannot believe that you, of Tsarist blood, granddaughter of the Emperor Alexander III, daughter of the sister of our Holy Tsar, would resolve upon such vile treachery. There seems to have been quite a bit of truth in the congratulatory letters, because the downfall of Rasputin was indeed wildly celebrated. Dobson writes that, when Dmitri had the effrontery to occupy the royal box at the Mikhailovsky Theatre the night after the killing, he was forced to leave to escape an ovation from the audience. Candles were lit in front of the icon of St. Dmitri in the Kazan Cathedral. People knelt in grateful prayer outside the Moika Palace. Factory workers telephoned to say they were forming a guard to protect Dmitri and Felix. Officers, toasting them in champagne in their clubs and messes, also vowed to protect them. The Tsar, who had left the front and rushed home as soon as he was informed of the murder, was appalled that members of his own family were involved in this ghastly business. "I am filled with shame that the hands of my kinsmen are stained with the blood of a simple peasant," were his words. But nevertheless, he failed to dole out a just punishment to the culprits, fearful of losing the little support he had left within his own family, who unanimously disapproved of his connection to Rasputin. Dmitri was sent to the Persian front, and Felix was exiled to a life of luxury at his estate of Radkinoe. Far from being appalled that their family member is a murderer, a group of close relatives of Dmitri, including his stepmother, his father and grandmother, wrote an open letter to the Tsar, asking for even more clemency. "Your Imperial Majesty, we all whose signatures you will read at the end of this letter earnestly beg you to soften your severe decision concerning the fate of Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich. We know that he is physically ill and deeply shaken, morally oppressed. Your Imperial Majesty must be aware of the heavy conditions in which our troops are stationed in Persia, the absence of housing, epidemics, and other scourges of mankind. To send Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich there would be tantamount to complete ruin." The Tsar's answer consisted of a few lines written on the margin of this petition. "No one has the right to kill. I know that there are many others besides Dmitri Pavlovich whose consciences give them no rest because they are compromised. I am amazed that the family should address such demands of me." The fatal flaw of Tsar Nicholas II was that he often instinctively knew the right thing to do, but almost never had the strength of character to actually do it. The rest of the conspirators got away completely scot-free. Eager to get away from the angry Tsarina, Purishkevich and Dr. Lazovert left for the front. The doctor would confess on his deathbed that he could not bring himself to break his Hippocratic oath and had used the harmless powder instead of the poison, which explains why Rasputin did not seem to react to it. Neither of them were ever prosecuted for the role they played in the murder. Even before leaving the capital, Felix's jubilant mood had subdued. It became clear that the damage had already been done. The Tsar did not magically morph into a constitutional monarch. The soldiers were still dying, and the people were still hungry. A moral cleansing had not been achieved through the murder. Irina hurried to rejoin her husband, stopping Kiev along the way, where Grand Duchess Olga Alexandrovna reported about her that she is so sure of her spouse's heroic deed and only regrets not to have been there too. The assassins thought they were saving Russia. But in the cold light of day, only one fact remained: that a group of privileged, ostensibly educated men had murdered a peasant and gotten away with it. The peasants of Russia, haggard from the constant struggle for survival which was their life, could see only this: they killed one of us because he got too close to the Tsar. In March, something broke within the country. There was no more bread, the workers were on strike, the working class had reached its breaking point. They spilled out onto the streets and demanded bread and peace and a decent life. Young soldiers joined them, sometimes against the express orders of their superiors. The streets of St. Petersburg belonged to the people, and their voices would be heard right up to the throne room. The Tsar and his wife, alienated from their aristocratic supporters and their own family, were left alone to face this reality, for whom neither had the fortitude to deal with. Dobson sums it best when he writes that the Tsar never really understood his people, mistakenly believing that a special relationship existed between them and himself. He and Alexandra lived in a dream world, peopled by a happy, God-fearing, Tsar-loving peasantry. They were deaf to the ever more insistent cries for bread, land, and peace. In the end, nothing shocked the Tsar more than his loyal people should turn against him. On the 15th of March, 1917, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated both his position and that of his son in favor of his brother Grand Duke Mikhail Alexandrovich, who saw the offer for the poisoned chalice it really was and refused. The Russian provisional government assumed power in the wake of this pathetic end of 3 centuries of rule by the Romanov house. In the meantime, Felix lived very comfortable at his estate, safe from the war and the rage of the Tsarina and the rest of Rasputin's supporters. He was annoyed that the secret police kept him under surveillance and read his letters, but was aware that his life could have been worse. His parents and his wife had joined him there and lived a pleasant, quiet existence. The estate boasted a zoo and a large garden and park, impeccably maintained by an army of servants. The only thing the Yusupovs could have complained of was that there were no other aristocrats with whom they could socialize, although this was alleviated when a group of 60 aristocrats came over for a hunt and to demonstrate their approval of Felix's actions. In spite of having solemnly promised his co-conspirators to never speak of what happened in the night of the murder, Felix was almost constantly boasting about his part in it, and he entertained his aristocratic guests with retellings of that night's events. However, at the end of March, the provisional government allowed Felix to return to St. Petersburg after only a few months of exile. Our protagonist returned to a changed city. Imperial portraits and symbols disappeared from buildings. Whatever spell the aristocracy had held over Russia, it had shattered. Something was in the air, and the upper classes sniffed it with fear and uncertainty. In his book Former People, The Last Days of the Russian Aristocracy, Douglas Smith chronicles the dizzying speed of the change in attitude of peasants towards their masters. At the Tkachenko's estate of Veselaya in Ukraine, life seemed the same as always, at least outwardly. But then things began to change in small ways. The change was undefinable, hard to pin down, yet grimly unmistakable, Marie Tkachenko remembered. The 2 old coachmen kissed our hands with the usual respectful cordiality, but seemed uneasy and looked around, as if they were afraid somebody was watching them. In the house, things began to disappear. A scarf, a blouse, a bottle of eau de cologne. The servants began to whisper in groups and would then lapse into a sudden silence if any of us appeared. On her walks, the peasants no longer step off the path to let Marie pass as before. Now she had to give way to them. Alexei Tatishev noticed that at the family estate of Tashan in the Poltava province, the servants that summer seemed reticent and at times surly and reluctant to do their work. One day, a peasant delegation came to the house to speak to his aunt. They waited on the marble terrace outside, some spitting in defiance. Later that day, a scene took place that would have been inconceivable even a year before. When Tatishev's aunt came onto the marble terrace and told a peasant woman to stop herding her cows into the estate's carefully maintained yard, the peasant woman came onto the terrace, lifted up her skirts, and left a very big, unpleasant present on that fine marble, in full view of the lady of the house. "Herd the cows yourself," said the peasant woman. The family packed up and left for Kiev a short time after. They were one of the countless wealthy families who were chased away from their summer estates by the barely contained hostility of their servants and peasants. For many of them, it would be the last summer they had a country estate at all. When one really thinks about it, it was astonishing how easily the authority of the aristocracy collapsed. They seemed so shocked at what was happening around them that they didn't know what to do about it, other than retreat into their stronghold of St. Petersburg. Few of them realized early on that their very survival was being threatened. Among those who saw the writing on the wall were Felix and the rest of his family, who took refuge in their Kériolet estate. In an intelligent move, they all had brought as much jewelry as they could possibly carry, and Felix and Irina's brother Theodore made a dangerous journey to St. Petersburg and brought back 2 Rembrandts, the man in the large hat and the woman with the fan. The most valuable family jewelry, including the Cartier rock crystal and diamond tiara worn by Irina on her wedding day, was hidden by Felix together with the aid of his most trusted servant in a room behind a staircase at the Moika Palace, which was then walled up and painted over. Corinne Hall claims that around 1,182 paintings were removed from their frames, rolled and stored above false ceilings or in specially concealed locations, as well as 100 packages of silver, 184 musical instruments, antique sculptures, snuff boxes, coins, weapons, jewels, and tapestries. Heavy iron doors concealed storage rooms, whose shelves and cupboards were stacked with gold and silver plate, porcelain, and china. A column in the ballroom contained valuable violins, including 2 by Stradivarius. The family's personal archive was hidden in a secret room behind bookcases in the library. Felix's hope was that if the valuables remained hidden, he would be able to claim them later. For all we know, there might be some things still hidden inside the Moika Palace today, waiting in vain in the dark for their owner. It's important to note that at the beginning of World War I, the Tsar had encouraged the Russian aristocracy to bring their wealth back into Russia, and the patriotic Princess Zinaida had done exactly that, leaving only 5% of the fabulous Yusupov fortune outside Russian borders. Now, with their bank accounts frozen, the Yusupovs depended heavily on their material goods for survival. Once the Bolsheviks took power in November 1917 and St. Petersburg descended even more into lawlessness and violence, Felix realized that this had become a matter of life and death and escaped to the Crimean Peninsula, where his family was waiting for him at their estate. But even there, the long red arm of the Bolsheviks was grasping for them. They were constantly watched by guards, and any random band of marauding Bolsheviks could barge into their mansion and search it. They would barge in, stinking of alcohol, their clothes stained with blood that was not theirs, diamond brooches and strings of pearls dangling from them, and took pleasure in humiliating and terrifying their targets. The whole family was keenly aware that any of these men could, at a whim, put an end to their lives. In spite of their attempts to carry on as usual, they could not shake the fear simmering within the walls of the mansion. They were also surprised when they were informed by their servants that they had decided to introduce the 8-hour workday model. They were no longer fully at the beck and call of their masters. They were having a picnic on a lovely summer day when the news reached them that the Tsar and his whole family had been murdered. The Yusupovs were skeptical, as they had been hearing similar rumors ever since the imperial family had been spirited away to the faraway Ekaterinburg. Partly because of that, and partly because the idea was too awful to entertain, they refused to believe the news. Only later, they would find out that this was true. Thus ended in blood and ashes the reign of one of the world's most powerful dynasties, which, after ruling over Russia for more than 3 centuries and serving as the instrument of her greatness, was the involuntary cause of her downfall, would write Felix in his memoirs. Not even the end of World War I in November 1918 brought any improvement for the Yusupovs. Finally, in March 1919, a ray of light poked through the clouds. The British sent the battleship HMS Marlborough to the Black Sea to retrieve Dowager Empress Marie, the sister of Queen Alexandra. The widowed queen was rightfully worried about the safety of her sister and urged her to come to England. But the Dowager Empress refused to leave her friends and family behind, and so triggered a mass evacuation of aristocrats instead. 81 people, among which were Felix and his family, and 200 tons of baggage were loaded. As the ship was sailing away from the shore, these men and women did not know that they were saying goodbye not to just their country, which they would never see again, but to a charmed, carefree life, filled with rose gardens and sleighs with silver bells, heavy velvet dresses and well-oiled leather boots, a life of relevance, of never having to boil an egg, that ease and safety they didn't know they took for granted. For the aristocrats left behind all over Russia, life would become unrecognizable. Those who were not killed outright were stripped of most of their property and exiled to remote corners of the country. They became pariahs. Their valuables were sold, their palaces were looted and torched, their magnificent libraries were turned into cigarette paper. In order to understand how much of the cultural patrimony of Russia was destroyed or sold in those years, it helps to view aristocratic estates as cultural ecosystems containing libraries, musical archives, art, local historical records, gardens with rare plants designed by famous names, in other words, museum-worthy collections. This could have all belonged to the people. At least from the perspective of someone who loves history, the word regrettable doesn't do justice to this kind of loss. Douglas Smith's book Former People is a must-read for those of you who are interested in witnessing the Russian Revolution and its aftermath from the perspective of the losing parties, that is, the aristocracy. For some reason, what stayed with me, even after all these years, was the image of the ancient Golitsyn family gathered around a bonfire in their courtyard, burning several generations' worth of family letters. Felix ends his memoir Lost Splendor with this thought: on leaving our country with heavy hearts that 13th day of April 1919, we knew that we were going into exile, but how long it would last, none of us could tell. Who could have dreamed that 33 years later, it would still be impossible to foresee the end? What followed were endless years of restless migration from Italy to England and France. Felix and Irina often found themselves living separately due to their financial circumstances. Letters exchanged between the pair show an intimate glimpse into their lives. Nicknames and terms of endearment, endless logistics, tender words and feelings of longing, but also disagreements. One main source of conflict was little Irina, the couple's only daughter, nicknamed Baby or Bébé. Her mother wanted to have her with her. Felix, on the other hand, thought it was better for the little one to enjoy some stability with his parents. In one particularly poignant letter dated May 26th, Old Style, 1919, the 24-year-old Irina writes the following to her husband: "My dear Felix, this morning, lying in bed, I cried while thinking of Bébé. You do not like tears, so I took advantage of your absence. Your letter upset me far more than I had expected. We should have taken Bébé with us. I felt that I would not see her again for a long time. I absolutely do not understand why your parents want to wait in Italy for the possibility of returning to Crimea, when they could easily go to Finland and live there. Besides, I want to have Bébé with me at last, independently. You will probably say that this is a whim or selfishness on my part. It is the first time I hear that a mother's wish to have her own child with her is called selfishness. Ordinary parents keep their children with them. Why can't we? You overwhelm me with all sorts of reasonable arguments. They are good for the mind, but for the heart they are completely useless. In this case too, my mind agrees, but my heart protests. One cannot always live by reason alone, otherwise one grows hardened. In short, I want Bébé. Do you understand? So, here we are. You will probably be in a bad mood after reading this letter, but what can I do? I did not write it with my mind. Think about it. I kiss you tightly, Irina." The sad, yet tenderly teasing letter tells us much about the dynamic of the couple. We find out that Felix is uncomfortable with negative displays of emotion. His wife has learned it is better not to cry in front of him. Felix's instinct appears to be towards rationalization and emotional management, an attempt to master painful situations through reason. Irina resists this gently but firmly, defending her needs as a mother against what she perceives as excessive reliance on intellect. The letter acquires a melancholic quality in light of later developments. Princess Irina's relationship with her daughter would remain emotionally distant. Here, already in 1919, one glimpses her yearning to claim her maternal role, a wish constrained by exile, family arrangements, and perhaps also by the couple's differing emotional temperaments. Irina has often been portrayed as shy, restrained, somewhat inscrutable. Her correspondence reveals a clever, gentle, warm, and patient nature. She made and sent Felix little cloth dolls which he pinned to his pillow to feel less alone when they were apart. She loved to gently tease him, as in this letter from February 1920, when Irina was in Rome. "Besides that, Your Excellency, I thank you very much for your congratulations on the occasion of the 6th anniversary of my wedding. It is so like you to congratulate me on the fact that 6 years ago I married you. Terrible." When Felix wrote to her that he will undergo surgery in London, she hastily wrote to him on the 4th of June 1920. "Do not dare undergo the operation without me. Write me a detailed letter. I shall wait for it anxiously." Felix would often telegram and then forget to mention his address or forget to purchase and send the items she required. Irina heroically tolerated her husband's constant forgetfulness, but even her patience had a limit, and in a letter written in Biarritz on the 5th of July 1919, she thunders at him. "Fikanov," she begins, addressing him by his nickname. "You pig! Why have you still not sent me the things I asked you for? Why? I need them now. Do you understand? Now! Especially the powder. I have none left. Right now. In London I could have obtained all this myself, but since I wrote to you about it, that means I need it immediately. Do you understand? I am really angry with you. Is it really so difficult? You did not send cigarettes for Papa either, and he has none left. I asked Odie to tell you about the things. Either he forgot or you have completely lost your head. I don't know. In any case, this is unbearable. You probably expected a tender letter with cooing like a dove, but you got this instead. In short, you will receive no tender or any other letters from me until you send me what I asked for. Send the powder immediately. Out of politeness, I kiss you tightly. Irina." "My dear Irina," responds Felix, "how unkind it is to write such letters to poor Ficlementi," another one of Felix's nicknames. "He was so happy to see his Inununguri soon," Felix's nickname for Irina, "and suddenly received such a cold shower, and so undeservedly. 2 weeks ago I sent you from London everything you asked for. Some Englishman was travelling to Madrid, and I asked him to take the package with him. I do not remember his name. I met him by chance. It must be that the scoundrel kept the things to himself." Another facet of their dynamic rears its head here. Irina, fed up with her husband's unreliability, makes direct demands while Felix deflects her accusations with affectionate theatrics and a suspiciously unverifiable explanation. Their correspondence is playful and sweet. They often write about how much they missed each other. "My dear little soul," writes Felix in 1919, "I could not sleep. It was terribly uncomfortable without you. It is truly very sad to be alone, and there is emptiness all around." It is rather strange to think that these two played a part in a murder plot that involved lies, deceit, and the breaking of the unspoken law of sacred hospitality. In the last chapter of our story, it is worth mentioning a few things about the Yusupovs' life in exile. Upon their arrival to Paris, Felix and Irina were delighted when the jeweler Joseph Chomet, or Old Chomet as Felix used to call him, approached them to return a bag of diamonds they had left with him before the war and completely forgotten about it. It was not even a one-time occurrence. The Yusupovs had been so wealthy that they basically sprinkled diamonds and jewels around Europe, leaving them in the care of jewelers to be turned into magnificent pieces, only to forget about these little trinkets and trifles. For them, a bag of diamonds might as well have been a bag of potato chips. For the emigrated Russian nobility, now was the time to sink or swim, and it found itself at a marked disadvantage. None of these men and women had ever had a proper job. The men in particular had very few marketable skills. Some enrolled in the French Foreign Legion, others took on jobs as waiters, drivers, stable boys, gardeners. Strangely enough, it was the women who adapted the fastest. Having acquired a considerable amount of fine feminine skills and often benefiting from a superb education, these Russian noblewomen became models, seamstresses, translators, ballet and music teachers, governesses. After all, who wouldn't want their daughters to be educated by a genuine countess? The Yusupovs did not get jobs. Instead, Felix labored to organize help for his destitute compatriots. He organized charity events, asked his British friends for help, and did his best to support this stream of ragged, bewildered aristocrats who, having never had to boil an egg in their lives, now found themselves unable to even buy one. Felix sold the Yusupov jewels piece by piece, together with the two Rembrandts. The fleeing Russian aristocrats had flooded the European market with jewels, and the jewelers took full advantage of that, driving the prices low, knowing of their desperation. Dobson writes that it used to be the fashion in St. Petersburg for rich families to send their linen to London or Paris to be laundered. But by Christmas 1932, the Yusupovs were reduced to the ludicrous situation where Irina would go out at night to some smart function wearing the black pearl necklace of Catherine the Great, worth about $500,000, and then come home to wash their underclothes in the bath. I would like us to take a few seconds here to contemplate the idea of sending one's bedsheets and nightgowns to another country to be washed. The way these people lived was out of this world, wasn't it? Just like his father, Felix was a poor businessman, and this time he did not have any of the vast family fortune to withstand his bad investments. He and Irina sold their valuables piece by piece until there were almost none. His situation would not have been so unfortunate if he hadn't lived large. He threw parties, bought houses in Corsica, rented villas. An average person would have lived a very comfortable life with the resources the Yusupovs had in exile, but it should be clear by now that our protagonists were not the average person. For better or for worse, that is for you to decide. One of his more successful ventures was the fashion house IRFÄ, founded in 1924 together with Irina. The name is a combination of the first two letters of their first names. For their debut, they didn't bother with traditional advertising. Instead, Irina and other young Russian émigrés modeled some of the dresses during a fashion show at the Ritz in the winter of 1924, causing a sensation. Eventually, the Russian diaspora, to whom they were so devoted, showed up in style to support them. They had stores in Paris, London and Berlin, and eventually expanded their catalogue with porcelain as well as perfume. This was all brought to ruin by the Great Depression, and Maison IRFÄ closed down in 1931. Sometimes they would strike gold in the most unexpected of places. In 1932, MGM released the highly historically inaccurate film Rasputin and the Empress, in which the mad monk seduces and ravishes the niece of the Tsar, a character by the name of Princess Natasha. Princess Natasha was also the fiancée of Prince Paul Chegoriev, who would eventually assassinate Rasputin in the film. As you can probably tell, these characters were a thinly veiled depiction of Felix and Irina. Outraged at Irina's portrayal, the couple sued MGM in 1934 for libel, an invasion of privacy. They won a huge sum of money, and they are the reason why films used the infamous "any similarity to actual persons is purely coincidental" disclaimer even today. Fellow YouTuber The Girl in the Tiara has an excellent video about the lawsuit, which I will link in the description. I highly recommend watching it. Another stroke of luck came to Yusupovs in the form of the Château de Kériolet, who had once belonged to Felix's ancestor Zinaida Ivanovna Yusupova. She had gifted it to the French department of Finistère, where it was located, on the condition that it should be kept in good shape, that the furniture should not be sold, and that the trees in its marvelous park should not be cut down. More than half a century later, Felix's daughter Bébé visited it without knowing who it had belonged to, and was stunned to come face to face with Zinaida's portrait. The woman in the painting looked so much like her that Bébé made inquiries and realized she was looking at her ancestor. She of course told her father about this, and Felix was quick to do his homework. Realizing that the terms of his ancestor's will had not been respected, Felix sued and gained ownership of the castle, which he sold for a pretty sum of money. During the Second World War, the Yusupovs held a low profile and were wary of the occupying German forces. The Nazis had confiscated an enormously valuable pearl belonging to the Yusupovs, and, when Felix approached them to protest this seizure, they attempted to recruit him as a society agent. What they offered was very tempting. One of the most beautiful houses in Paris at his disposal, the best food, and unlimited money. The image of Irina going to the jeweler Cartier and buying something without looking at the price, just like in the old days. A revival of the Yusupov way of life. All he had to do is be charming and entertain guests sent to him by the Germans. This was something Felix could have easily done, but to his great credit, he refused. He could not bear the thought of betraying the French, who had received him with open arms. The Germans relented, but kept the pearl locked away for the duration of the war. Felix also wrote several books about Rasputin's assassination, with the first one being published in 1927 and the most well-known one, Lost Splendor, in 1954. In spite of the pact the assassin had made to never speak about the murder, Felix never stopped talking about it. It was the defining moment of his long life, which ended on the 27th of September 1967. His family and household surrounded the bedside of this strange old prince. Christopher Dobson spoke to one of the household attendants and was told the following. "We sat by his bedside for days. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and they had become a startling blue. They were the bluest eyes I had ever seen. He looked beautiful. A smile lit up his face as if he had seen something wonderful. And then he died. He was quite serene. He died a saint." His devoted, heartbroken wife would follow him 3 years later. Dobson writes, "He had told Retador only a few months after the murder that I don't want to be forever remembered for just one thing." Yet in the end, it was the only thing that gave his life any purpose. He had not been made for action, but for enjoying the Yusupov fortune, dispensing largesse, indulging his whims, and then trickling out of this life without disturbing the world overmuch. Perhaps that is not entirely fair. Felix's best quality was his generosity. Whenever he was approached by a Russian in desperate need of money, it was perfectly in character for him to empty his pockets for the stranger, even if that left him without any money to pay his own debts. In this respect, Felix embodied like no other the concept of noblesse oblige, and many people owe their survival to him. Dobson continues in his assessment of Felix's life. "It's not given to many men to be able to shift the course of the world even by the tiniest fraction, but Felix did that. Combined with all their other troubles, the personal blow of the loss of our friend demoralized Nicholas and Alexandra and was one of the factors which left the Tsar unable to withstand the forces of revolution. It may well be that the revolution would have taken place without the murder of Rasputin, but the fact that family members of the imperial family could kill, in the cruelest fashion, the man who had become the power behind the throne and suffer no real punishment, finally exposed Nicholas's feebleness and gave encouragement to the revolutionaries, while causing hatred for the aristocrats among the peasants. Truer words have not been spoken. In the end, one cannot deny that Felix Yusupov lived an extraordinary life, which continues to fascinate to this day. He was born a little too early, or a little too late. On a summer day in 2017, the Moika Palace received 4 unusual and beautiful visitors. They sat in Princess Zinaida's famous boudoir under her portrait and posed for photographs. Had the walls been able to speak, they might have said, "Where do we know them from? Why are they so familiar?" The 4 guests were Ksenia Sfiri, her daughter Tatiana Sfiri, and her 2 granddaughters, Marilia and Yasmina. They are the only descendants of Prince Felix Yusupov and Princess Irina. How strange it must have felt to be there in those splendid surroundings, knowing that, had history been a little different, all that would have belonged to them, and it would have been their portraits taken by the best artists of our times that would hang next to their illustrious ancestor. Maybe one day they will tell us about what they felt during that visit. And so, for a little while, there was again Yusupov and Tsarist blood back at the Moika Palace. How to end such a tale? I don't think the usual way would do, so I will leave you with one of my favorite anecdotes from the life of this most extraordinary couple. In the 1950s, Princess Irina went to London with her brother and visited a jeweler by the name of Wartsky, who had made an incredible purchase at the end of the Second World War, the famous Fabergé coronation egg of 1897. It was a masterpiece made of gold, enamel, diamonds and platinum, and it opened to reveal a surprise, a miniature replica of the carriage that carried the Tsarina to Moscow. It was made out of gold, and it had functional platinum wheels, and its little doors opened and closed. The miniature carriage was carefully taken out from its precious shell and placed next to it. Irina took it and began wheeling it around the way one would do with a toy, to the horror of one of the assistants, who anxiously begged her to stop because the carriage was of immense value and it should be handled with the greatest care. "How ridiculous," said Irina. "I used to play with this in the nursery." So I'm going to leave you this image of the delicate little princess playing with the golden Fabergé carriage in her nursery, so long, long ago. Until next time.